14 Power Conference programs hired a new coach this offseason. Who among them are we most excited to watch this year?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Friday and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shade, here to bring you content every single day here in the off season. Not just November through March. We are with you 5 days a week, all summer long, finding content to get out here, even in the middle of August, as it's a pretty slow time in the college basketball season. Folks, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. It's the dog days of summer. The sports, they're not really sportsing like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, Isaac, we spent a long time trying to decide how to tackle today's show, ultimately decided on having a conversation about the 14 new head coaches who are coming into the Power Conference level. And what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about each conference, SEC and Big 12 in the first segment. We're going to talk about the Big 10 and the Big East in the second segment, and then we're going to talk about the ACC, and then we're going to talk about some coaches we're excited about that aren't at the Power 5 level to close out the show. And before we kind of get into which of the coaches we want to talk about here, we should define most excited about, because we've left that intentionally kind of vague, because like we don't want to just say this is the coach we think is going to be the best in year one, or this is the coach we think is going to be the best, long-term hire or anything like that. It's more just like, who are we most excited to see? Who is the most intriguing hire, is maybe the most interesting, like just based on how they constructed their roster or their fit in the city, like various things. Again, we kind of want to keep it open-ended and not just say, well, this is the coach who's won the most games, so he's going to be the best. Like that's not very exciting. So we're going to try to kind of keep it fairly open-ended. And Isaac, why don't we start with the conference that has kind of dominated a lot of the coaching conversation this entire offseason, the SEC. 3 new coaches. Most of the conversation have been about 2 of those 3 new coaches, but why don't you tell us who the newcomers are and who you're most excited about?
For sure, Andy, you obviously, if you're listening to a college basketball podcast in August, 2 of these 3 off the top of your head. That's John Calipari going from Kentucky to Arkansas, replacing Eric Musselman. Mark Pope going from BYU to Kentucky to replace Cal, and then Mark Byington, who leaves James Madison to replace Jerry Stackhouse at Vanderbilt. And so, Andy, obviously the answer here is Mark Byington. No, of course. Look, I don't want to get Big Blue Nation all mad at us. Andy, for me, it's Mark Pope over John Calipari. And I think part of this was something, as you and I were kind of getting into these conversations that you voiced. And so I don't want to take too much of that from you, because I want you to be able to talk about it. But I think the way you said it is, Coach Cal's going to do what Coach Cal's going to do. We've even seen that in his recruiting, right, at Arkansas, thanks to all the chicken money. But I think the Mark Pope of it all, the returning to his alma mater, kind of not fully being sure, are we going to see them have that same 3-point barrage that he had at BYU? I think there's just the unknown, the anticipation of looking forward to it, I think has me just really excited about Kentucky basketball. I feel like this could be a return to the Kentucky basketball like that you and I grew up with, like like the Tubby era, for example, where it's just like, it's not just getting all these one and dones, which is fun in its own way, but I'm just excited to maybe see, I think the way I want to put it is like a more pure version of the Kentucky basketball that I grew up watching with like Reed Shepherd's dad, right? Like that kind of stuff. And that for me makes Mark Pope the answer to this question.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. And I think like I'm intrigued by the roster construction for Mark Pope. How is he going to, fit the pieces together? I saw a quote from Kerr Kriisa recently talking about how Lamont Butler is PG1, and I'd kind of anticipated that Kriisa was going to start at the 1 and Butler was going to come off the bench. I don't know exactly how that's going to happen, but it feels like there's a little bit more intrigue into the lineups that Mark Pope might run, and not only just for the next year, but over the next like 3 or 4 years. I'm really excited to see what happens with Kentucky basketball, what happens when Mark Pope begins to establish his culture and his style and has more than a rushed offseason to put an entire roster together. Obviously, a lot of the players he brought in are going to be gone next year, so he's going to have to do some replacement. But once he's getting his recruits and his types of players, that's going to be really interesting. And at Arkansas, like, again, I'm unless John Calipari makes dramatic changes, which I don't think he's going to do.
He said he's not.
He said not. Like, the next 3 or 4 years at Arkansas are going to be somewhat predictable. It doesn't mean they're not going to be good. Kentucky was good under John Calipari. They just didn't quite, they were struggling to break through recently. I am very curious if Calipari can break that trend at Arkansas. But ultimately, I'm less intrigued only because it's a little bit more predictable what I think is going to happen at Arkansas under Calipari. And even like looking at the roster he constructed, yeah, you can kind of see like, John L. Davis is sort of an Antonio Reeves kind of mold, and the freshmen coming in are in the mold of a lot of the Calipari freshmen, and Fierro and Ivasic are guys who has already played for Calipari. So you kind of feel comfortable knowing what that's going to look like. Whereas, outside of Jackson Robinson, that's not the case at BYU at Kentucky for Mark Pope. So I'm very intrigued how that's going to look short term and longer term. And I'll say very quickly, I am intrigued about Mark Byington too. Not nearly on level, but honestly, I think it's an exciting hire for Vanderbilt and could really pay off. I think it's going to take some time, but I'm excited about that too.
Yeah, as well you should be. Obviously, Vandy is a hard place to win, a hard place to recruit, but should be a lot of fun. Obviously, we loved watching James Madison last year. Andy, let's move to the Big 12, where we thought Scott Drew might be on this list at one point in time, which would have actually taken Mark Pope off the previous list. Right. He wasn't. He's eating Mexican food. He's staying in Waco, Texas. Andy, we've got 3 Big 12 entrants. Why don't you take us through it and give us your pick?
Yeah, we got obviously the replacement for Mark Pope at BYU. That's Kevin Young, a Phoenix Suns assistant coach, taking over at BYU. Got Steve Lutz coming from Western Kentucky to take over for Mike Boynton at Oklahoma State. And then we got Darian DeVries from Drake taking over at West Virginia for Josh Ehlert, who was the interim head coach replacing Bob Huggins last year. And I think for this one, it's kind of similar where there's 2 that I think are a little bit higher than the third one. And the two that are in the top of my mind are Young and DeVries, with Lutz a little bit lower down on that list. I think I'm going to lean Kevin Young, and I think that's based mostly on how the offseason has gone. I'm very intrigued by what Darian's going to do with his son Tucker in the mix at West Virginia. That's going to be super exciting. But Kevin Young, he takes over this BYU program that had more success last year in the Big 12 than people thought that they would. And they've landed, I believe, the first and second highest ranked recruits in program history for the 2024 class. They've also landed the 6th highest rated recruit in program history. None of those 3 incoming freshmen are Igor Demin, who is a Russian prospect who's 6'9" guard, who many people think is going to be a lottery pick. So you have 3 of your 6 highest rated freshmen ever, as well as a potential lottery pick coming over from Russia. That is an incredibly exciting offseason. And we kind of expected that BYU would start to recruit at a higher level because they're now a power team when they weren't previously. So I don't think that is shocking necessarily, but for a coach who hasn't recruited, who hasn't done this at this level, to have had that kind of success, to get Kenan Catchings, who decommitted from Purdue, to get Elijah Crawford, who decommitted from Stanford, and bring those guys in, that makes me even more excited. I'm very excited about both these coaches, but the offseason that Kevin Young and BYU have had is true. And they're in the top 7 for AJ Dibansa. Like that's not an immediate excitement because he's not going to be on the roster this upcoming season. But the fact that they're in that conversation and a legitimate player, like, it is not smoke and mirrors. They are a true contender to land the best high school basketball player on the planet. And BYU's never in that conversation. So it's already proving to be extremely exciting time to be a BYU basketball fan. So for me, that gives me the lean with Kevin Young.
I completely agree with you, Andy. He would have been my choice as well, Kevin Young. And I think the only thing I'll add that you hadn't said yet is that, I mean, let's remember, this is a guy who was in the conversation for multiple NBA head coaching jobs and wound up getting this one instead. And kind of saying along the way, hey, as I've seen the NBA lifestyle, this actually seems desirable to me to come to the D1 college level. Now, as I think you've said before, let's see how he's talking this time next year, right? But that said, I think plays a big role in the recruiting that you talked about. Guys are saying, oh, this is a dude that was high level for the Suns, that was widely coveted for a multitude of NBA head coaching vacancies. He knows exactly what he needs me to do to get me to the league. So let me go and be part of that. And it certainly helps, as you said, that now it's a Big 12 job as well. That said, let's go to DeVries and West Virginia, Andy, because as you said, they've got a young man who, oh, by the way, just so happens to be his son, as you said, in Tucker DeVries, who is one of the, top 5-10 scorers in Division I college basketball. I'm really curious to see how it translates up to the Big 12 level from the Missouri Valley level. I think it will, quite frankly. But what are the pieces like around him? How is that going to go for West Virginia this year? How can they bring it together? I think Coach DeVries does a good job. And, I know this West Virginia fan base who, is not that far removed from one of the best college basketball coaches in history, in Bob Huggins. They are thirsting to get back to that level. And so I'm really curious to see what it's going to be like. And obviously, in Stillwater, we'll see what happens there with Coach Lutz coming over from Western Kentucky. Had some great years there for the Hilltoppers. And so hopeful for them. Andy, we change now from talking to SEC and Big 12. After 2 straight NCAA tournament appearances at FAU, Dusty May heads to the Big 10, not to Indiana, but to Michigan. Can he right the ship for the Wolverines? We'll talk about that in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. Andy and I both love sports. We're so sad that we're coming to the end of the Olympics right now because that's going to leave us with only baseball, which we both love. But man, we're ready for football and basketball to get back. We love them so much. We never want them to stop. But man, just when the sports aren't sportsing like you want them to, the good news is that FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you got to do is open the app, dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Andy, how about some Wooden Award odds? We were having a good time guessing at some of these as we were putting the ad read together. I'm going to give you the top 5 Wooden Award odds. Hunter Dickinson leads the way at plus 550. RJ Davis and Mark Sears are tied for second at plus 600. Followed by Caleb Love and Janai Broom, tied for 4th at plus 1,500. Interestingly, no Cooper Flagg and none of the couple like Ace Bailey or any of the, VJ Edgecombe's the top freshman. So FanDuel's getting out of the odds games on the top freshmen. So if you want to get in on this, head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Andy, we're going to turn our attentions now to the Big 10 and the Big East, which is going to be the easiest of our conversations today. If you're not sure why I'm making that joke, we'll tell you about it in a second. Andy, there are 4 Big 10 head coaching changes. I'll go ahead and spill them off, and then you can give us your pick for your favorite. We've got, as we teased, Dusty May leaving FAU to go to Michigan, replacing Juwan Howard. We've got Jake Diebler, who was the associate head coach at Ohio State, staying there, taking over for Chris Holtmann, who we'll talk about more in just a second. We already talked about Musselman leaving Arkansas. He goes to USC to replace Andy Enfield, who we'll also talk about more in just a second. And then the 4th Big 10 addition is Danny Sprinkle leaving Utah State to go to that great Big 10 school, UW, going to coach at Washington, replacing Mike Hopkins there. Andy, who is your pick for who you're most excited about to come into the Big 10?
So I'm picking Dusty May, but I will acknowledge that the fact that there's 2 new head coaches taking over programs that are also brand new to the Big 10 is very interesting to me as well. I'm must over Sprinkle, and the fact that Danny Sprinkle's my 3rd most interesting new coach in the Big 10 says more about how I feel about Musselman at USC and May at FAU, because I'm actually really excited about what Danny Sprinkle is going to bring to Washington, a guy who was really successful at Montana State, really successful in 1 year at Utah State, bounces to UW, brings his superstar with him in Great Osobor. Lots of excitement there. Muss is endlessly interesting. Love him, hate him, however you feel. It is entertaining and it is interesting. And they have 11 new transfers, I think. Like it's going to be an insane year for USC with a completely new roster. But Dusty May is one of the most exciting mid-major, straight up to a high major head coaching hires that we've seen in a while. I mean, like we've had, every team wants to make the hire that ends up becoming a home run. Yep. There's a lot of talk about hiring a mid-major coach and having it fall on its face, and that happens. We've seen it. I mean, it happens at a lot of schools. Most schools have made one mid-major hiring mistake that the fan base can kind of point to and talk about. But when you hit it out of the park, when you hire a Nate Oates, when you make a move that just immediately works, Danny Hurley is another good example. When you can do that, it's franchise altering, program altering, and Dusty May has the ability to be that kind of hire for Michigan. I'm not saying he will. I'm not saying it's a lock. I'm saying he can be. It's the pedigree, the respect that he commanded among his peers, among his players, the ability to take FAU to a Final Four and then keep that entire roster together in the transfer portal era. I mean, that is insane. That is unprecedented. I know we haven't had many years of the transfer portal era, but we haven't seen other programs that are at that level do that. And so Michigan needed to make a move. Juwan Howard was very clearly not working out. I was one of the more obvious, hey, we're gonna move on at this offseason moves that we had outside of Tony Stubblefield and Kenny Payne, really. But I love this hire. I'm excited to see what he can do in the Big Ten. I think it's probably the most interesting on this list, I think, in my mind, because of the jump that he's taking. I mean, he's not just going from, I know the conference he was in last year is better than Conference USA, but it's still a big jump to the Big Ten, and the expectations are sky high at Michigan. So there's a lot of pressure, a lot of excitement. I like the offseason moves that they made. They keep bringing Vlad Golden, which is huge, keeps him from FAU, stays with May. They got some other great additions coming in the portal. Like, this is a really exciting time for Michigan basketball, and I think a lot of fans are probably going to dramatically overreact to how year one goes, when in reality we should probably not have serious conversations about Dusty May for like 2 or 3 years at Michigan. But of all the coaches on here, I think he's going to be under a lot of scrutiny just because of how big of a jump this is.
Andy, let me throw a curveball and go to Michigan's great arch rival, Ohio State. I'm going to go with Jake Diebler for the choice I'm most excited about here. Kind of following that Rodney Terry path at Texas when he was inserted as interim head coach last year, went 8-3 down the stretch for the Buckeyes, took them from what was a basically lost year. They made it to the NIT quarterfinals. He's a guy, he didn't play at Ohio State, he played at Valpo. But Andy, let's remember, Jake's brother, John, great Ohio State basketball player, right? So it runs in the family. I love that the Ohio State administration is entrusting him with this opportunity. Hey, let's see if this can work. Why not, right? Because you haven't lost anything. You've kept it internal. You've got players who wanted to continue to play for this guy. Look at what this transfer class he brought in. I know you and I are both big fans of it. And so what's going to happen in first full year one? I don't know, Andy, but I'm really intrigued. I'm really excited, and I can't wait to see how it comes together.
Yeah, the Aaron Bradshaw, Sean Stewart front court coming to Ohio State is endlessly interesting to me, and that alone makes them an incredibly interesting team coming into next year. So yeah, I'm with you 100%. And speaking of Chris Holtmann, who is getting replaced, Isaac, we only got one choice. We only got one choice in the Big East. We only got one coach we get to talk about here. That's Chris Holtmann going to DePaul. What are your thoughts on? I mean, I think I don't want to take your thoughts away from you here, but I think we can safely say comfortably anybody's better than Tony Stubblefield at this point, right?
I mean, look. Yeah, it's DePaul. DePaul, who we have talked a lot about this offseason, joins Mizzou with the ignominy of being the only 2 power conference schools to go winless in conference play last year, Andy, and that's just painful. So there's nowhere to go but up for DePaul. I think getting somebody of Chris Holtmann's reputation is huge for the Blue Demons to be able to pull that. I'm under no expectations that he's going to be able to immediately flip this thing around, right? Like that's just not realistic in any sort of way. But to get Chris Holtmann from Ohio State now at DePaul, like we've talked about on a Big East show at some point this offseason about just how excited we are about the Big East crop of coaches in general. And this is huge, huge. And so even if they could get 5 Big East wins this year, I think that's a win. And I know that's like 5-13 and Big East plays a win. Yeah. After you just went 0-18, everything up in the right direction is a win. But home run higher, in my opinion. And I'm excited about it because where do you go but up from the goose egg in the W column last year?
Yeah, a good offseason, I think, too, for DePaul. I mean, they didn't bring in a ton of premier talent, but that they almost never have at DePaul, if we're being honest. And for Holtmann to bring in some young upside guys, Leighton Blocker, somebody I'm very interested to see what he can do at DePaul coming over from Arkansas. They got some low major or some mid-major guys who are coming up who I think are going to be solid. Connor Enright from Drake is one I'm interested in. Jacob Meyer from Coastal Carolina. They get CJ Gunn from Indiana. Like, there's just a lot of intrigue. Again, are they going to compete in the top half of the Big East? No. Are they going to compete to be last still? Probably. But if they're 5-13 and Chris Holtmann fires the crowd up and gets more, butts and seats in Chicago, that's a massive win for DePaul. And I think that it's very realistic to believe that could happen for them in year one. And this is the kind of hire that if he sticks around for a while could really be as good as it's going to get probably for a program like the Blue Demons.
And Andrew, just one last note. I'm looking at their non-con schedule right now. They're at 2 tough games. They're at Texas Tech, at Northwestern, but outside of that, no other power conference schools on that non-conference schedule. So an opportunity to get some wins under the belt and just get a little bit of that confidence going.
Well, we talked about Tony Stubblefield and Juwan Howard being probably 2 of the most likely coaches to lose their jobs this last offseason. But the one that we all expected, Kenny Payne, he's out at Louisville after 2 disastrous seasons. Pat Kelsey taken over. He's got the task of trying to lead the Cardinals back to the promised land in the ACC. We're going to talk about how quickly he might be able to do that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, I want to tell you all about Game Time. Going to MLB games in the summer, it's one of my favorite all-time things. The game, the food, the atmosphere, the sounds, everything that's part of the experience at a Major League Baseball game. I'm excited to be able to make all new memories for the last few months here of the baseball season. And thankfully, I don't have to sweat high-priced last-minute tickets because Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. And in fact, prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. So with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And since we talked Kentucky earlier, we're about to talk Louisville. Let's talk about that game. Rupp Arena, December 14th. There is a million great college basketball games on December 14th. Louisville at Kentucky might take the cake. Cheapest tickets right now, $333. Folks, I know tickets on the Game Time app go down. I don't know if they're going to go down much for that game, but you might be able to get yourself into the door there. That's going to be an absolute blast. So, folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, Isaac, closing out the show, continuing our conversation about the most exciting, intriguing, interesting, compelling new coaches in the Power 5 level. We're going to talk ACC, and then we're going to just kind of list off some other coaches at the non-power level that we're excited to see how they do in their new schools. We do want to start with the Atlantic Coast Conference, just like we had with, was it the Big Ten, where half of the new coaches are also new programs in the Big Ten. That is the case for 2 of the 3 new coaches in the ACC. Of course, we have Pat Kelsey from Charleston taking over for Kenny Payne at Louisville. We'll talk quite a bit about that. We also have Andy Enfield, who's going from USC to SMU, part of that insane coaching carousel that resulted in the John Calipari and Mark Pope moves. Again, he's replacing Rob Lanier, who went to Rice. And then you have Kyle Smith going from from Washington State to Stanford to replace Jared Haas. That's one of my favorite ones because for like 80 years, going from Wazoo to Stanford would be intra-conference, and now it is a WCC to ACC coaching move, which is, I mean, of all the weird statements we've gotten to make with new conference realignment, that one is one of my favorites. Not if you're a Wazoo fan, I apologize to them, but it is a fun one to talk about here. Isaac, Kelsey, Enfield, Smith, pretty exciting new trio of coaches joining the ACC. Who do you want to lead with here?
Look, it's got to be Pat Kelsey, Andy, because it's one of those things we always say. College basketball is better when Louisville basketball is really good. And man, like Pat Kelsey brings pedigree of winning, and he brings an energy and an enthusiasm that is infective. Whatever disease Pat Kelsey has, give me all of it. I want to be infected with it. I just love the passion and the energy that he has brought. I know Cards fans are amped up for this thing, but Andy, I mean, you look at what he's done at Charleston the past several years and at Winthrop before that. I was looking back at it in the past 9 seasons between Winthrop and Charleston. Pat Kelsey has won 6 of the last 9 regular season championships that he's been in, and 5 of the last 9 conference tournament championships between the Big South and CAA, including getting the CAA regular season and conference tournament championships each of the last 2 years, Andy. And so, the man is a winner everywhere he goes, and I have no reason to think he's not going to do that at Louisville. Same kind of thing we said with DePaul. It's hard to go anywhere else but up. And so I think that's the nice thing is, handicapping this thing in the ACC, which isn't as strong right now as it has perhaps historically been. Why couldn't Louisville finish top 5, 6, 7 in the ACC this year? Man, I cannot wait to see what this brings. Come on, Pat Kelsey, give it to me this year. What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, it's Pat Kelsey for sure. And I think Pat Kelsey at Louisville is going to be better than Chris Holtmann at DePaul. I feel incredibly confident in making that statement. And it is partly a testament to, I think Pat Kelsey is a better coach than Chris Holtmann, but I also he's got more resources. He's got a better roster. Like there's a ton of other factors at play there. But Isaac, we would need to actually do research to have this conversation. We have a couple more months of the offseason to maybe do so. But I think this might be the most exciting group of mid-major to high major coaches that we've seen in a long time, driven in particular by May and Kelsey. But that's not to discredit Danny Sprinkle, who I think is exciting in that conversation as well, or Gary and DeVries, who I think is exciting, and Mark Byington. I mean, if that's your top 5, that's a really good group of low major or mid-major to high major coaches. Obviously, there have been a lot of excitement about these coaches in the past that has not worked. So, 5 years from now, I'm very curious if we were to re-rank these 5 coaches, how it will go. I don't want to say shocked, but I'd be surprised if Pat Kelsey or Dusty May aren't at the very top of that list. And frankly, I wouldn't be shocked if it is Kelsey. He's a tremendous coach. The style that they play is so fun. And I think that matters here from the perspective of the conversation we're having about excitement about a coach. Like they play an exciting brand of basketball, and that absolutely matters when looking at this. And I think it'll help generate more interest for Louisville. I think anybody replacing Kenny Payne was going to get, kind of reinvigorate the fan base because they just were desperate to be excited about their basketball program again. But not only do they bring in an exciting young coach, he goes out and gets an incredible amount of talent in the transfer portal. I mean, they brought in Chucky Hepburn, they brought in Terrence Edwards, they brought in Javon Hadley and Corin Johnson. Like, it's just an incredible class of players coming to this Louisville program. So for me, it's Pat Kelsey. It's not particularly close. I really like Kyle Smith. He's been a fantastic coach at Columbia. He was a fantastic coach at San Francisco. He was a fantastic coach at Washington State. And I think he is somebody who has continued to succeed despite not being at super high resource institutions. Stanford is not a program that puts a lot of money or effort into their basketball program, but I still think they're going to do more so than any of the other programs he's been at. And while I wasn't super enthusiastic about the offseason they had this year, I trust Kyle Smith to get a lot out of the players that he brings in. And I think it may take some time, but I wouldn't be surprised if Stanford is back to being a better basketball program, at least than they were in the Jared Haas era.
Andy, we're a little short on time for our best of the rest part of this segment to pick who we would pick outside of the top 5 conference structure there. But man, some really intriguing options here. Who would you go with outside of the Power 5 conferences?
Yeah, I think I got to go with Josh Schertz, another coach from the Missouri Valley Conference, taking a new job. A lot of people thought Schertz was going to jump up to the Power 5 level the way that his counterpart Darian DeVries did at West Virginia. Schertz hadn't been at Indiana State for as long. He ends up taking the job at SLU, St. Louis in the A10. So it's still a bit of a jump in the sense that the A10 is arguably alongside the Mountain West and the WCC is one of the best non-power basketball conferences in the country. SLU hasn't been great. They weren't great in the Travis Ford era. He brings Robbie Avila with him to St. Louis. That definitely adds to the intrigue. They get some other talented transfers in that class as well. So I think not at the same level as Louisville, but I think that college basketball is better when the A10 is a multi-bid league or has like a lot of good teams in the conference, when Dayton and St. Louis and VCU and UMass and everybody are all competitive. And this hire makes St. Louis more competitive. So I'm excited to see what he can do there. Shout out Chris Mack going to Charleston too. Just got to give him a shout out. That's a fun one too.
Yeah. Andy, for me, there's kind of 3 that it boils down to. How can you not be intrigued to see what happens in Green Bay as Doug Gottlieb replaces Sundance Wicks? Doug Gottlieb, most recently of the Doug Gottlieb Show. Andy, so we see how he balances continuing to podcast or radio, whatever it is, and coach as well. But then I think for me, it boils down to 2 guys going to new schools after having not coached since 2022 at the Power Conference level. Chris Mack, who you just named, coming from Louisville, now going to Charleston to replace Pat Kelsey, little flipperoo. And then Quanzo Martin, who most recently was at Mizzou in 2022, heads back to Missouri State, where he started his head coaching career. I personally love it because Missouri State is an hour east of me in Springfield, Missouri. And so I'm hoping to get over there to watch that in action. But Andy, I think the choice for me is Chris Mack because, look, I thought he had things going really well for a little bit there at Louisville, and then things went a little bit sideways at the end of it there. There was the whole thing with Dino Gaudio there, and it just gave you some weird vibes. So I'm excited for him to get to start over a little bit at Charleston, which is a program that Pat Kelsey has left in really good hands. I think Chris Mack is a great basketball coach and excited to see what he can do there in Charleston. So Andy, any other thoughts before we get out of here? Very
quickly, Rob Lanier gets let go from SMU despite having a 20-win season. It was an odd choice that ended up, like we've talked about, kind of starting a really tremendous carousel in college hoops, because if SMU doesn't fire Rob Lanier, they don't hire Andy Enfield. Muss doesn't leave Arkansas. Cal doesn't go to Arkansas, et cetera, et cetera. I was surprised SMU fired a 20-win coach, and then he goes to their rival at Rice. I don't know if this is going to dramatically turn around Rice basketball, but the fact that they're not conference rivals anymore, obviously, as SMU goes to the ACC, but it's hard to not be intrigued by a coach taking a job at his previous school's rival after getting kind of let go in a way that you wouldn't expect. I'm interested to see if anything comes of that.
Yeah, that's a fun little storyline down there in Texas, Andy Patton. What a fun way to end the week of Locked On College Basketball. This is a fun show. Obviously, folks, this is one where we want to hear from you. Who would you pick in all these conversations that we've had today? Let us know. Hop into Locked On College Basketball Discord, and we'll have those conversations there. If you're not part of it, the link is in the show notes. It's free to join. We'd love to have you. If you haven't subscribed to the show on video and audio, very easy to do as well. Just hit subscribe, and you can get this show every single day of your week. Listen to it as you're driving to work or mowing the yard, whatever it is. Folks, as always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats. And until Monday, when Andy and I are right back with you. Peace.